So I feel like the solution to the busing that they've come up with is to delay the start times. And I think that makes it really hard for people to hold jobs. And so I find that although the county's telling us they're making progress on things, I find that the progress we're making is a solution which is not acceptable. And I don't think there's a solution for that in the calendar year. I did express that I actually spoke at the hearing at the school board, and I said that it was absurd for the start times to change during the year because people had made accommodations and everything like that, and all of a sudden everything is off. And I know for lots of things there are contracts and they can't just change them during the school year. So one thing changed that doesn't require a contract change, but other things did. So I am just bewildered at how we could be in such a disastrous situation and how this could even possibly be fixed.
Yeah.
It's 1 minute, Caroline. It seems hard to believe that the rest of the country knows how to get their children to school so the parents can get to work. And if the rest of the country can do it, we should be able to do it. And then the morning is messed up. We can't go to work. And then if parents have signed up for things like whether it's gymnastics or violin or something, they signed up 6 months ago for a certain time slot and they were racing across town to get there at 4 o'clock. And now our kids aren't even out of school until 4 o'clock. And we've already committed to this. We can't ask the tutor, oh, can our school time just change? Can you now take my child at 5? They're like, well, no.
Oh, wow.
All right, let's go upstairs.
Can you speak to which school time was changed for you? Were you one of the 9:15 to not 9:25 changes? Tier 3?
Yes, we're at Longfellow.
Longfellow. Okay, and it went from 9:15 to 9:25.
Yeah, and the problem that we were having when they went to 9:15 is that my wife sometimes works in the morning, and so that put me getting to work at 10 o'clock. And according to Dolly Parton, the standard workday is 9 to 5. And so the fact that I can't get to work at 9 o'clock is ridiculous. And my wife actually put something on Facebook for her friends to see what times schools were starting. And
we're the latest time in the country.
Yeah, I mean, our start time is just absurd. She did get a response from one parent said, well, they were trying to delay the high school start time and they didn't change anything because there was no way they could make it all work. And they figured that out ahead of time, as opposed to Howard County, which just changed it and said, oh, we don't care if it works or not. So, it's bewildering because figuring out the bus schedule is kind of a scientific thing that you can hire somebody with a math degree to do. And every teacher who teaches math in the middle schools and high schools should know how to solve this problem. And yet the school system is supposed to have people with math experience on their staff. And so I don't know if those people are like the administrators in Baltimore City where they actually failed math, but somehow they managed to make it into administration or not. But this is actually, you can put it into a computer and you can figure out it doesn't work. And so it's just mind-boggling how we got here, and I don't see how we can get out of this. But there's been like no response from the school board.
So can you speak to how much of a change did Longfellow go from? So they're 9:15 at the start of this year, and then it went to 9:25. What was it last year?
I think last year it started at 9, but the bus was picking them up at 8:30 to 8:40. So I would drop her off at the bus stop and get to work. And so now the bus is 9:05. So the bus is, the bus is much, much later. So.
Yeah, a lot of folks have expressed similar concerns with the later school start times, particularly for that tier 3 elementary school.
Did you hear the pediatrician speak at the school board? Did you listen to that?
Which one?
I'm
a pediatrician myself.
There was a pediatrician who testified at the school board hearing, and she said her kids are in high school and they have a later school start time, but because of the way everything worked out, they now have to get to school. They now have to wake up 10 minutes earlier.
Right. Yeah,
And
that's very true. So a lot of families, it seems like, especially now that the high school is starting at 7:50 again, it seems like there's not a lot of benefit for most students. Some are actually worse off than they were last year in the high school.
but it's kind of ironic because the goal of the change was to accomplish something and they completely missed it. And so now it's worse than it used to be. And so that's what's just bizarre is that I went out to solve a problem and I actually made it worse. And so I didn't even make anything better. So not only are parents upset and trying to figure out what to do, but it's actually worse than it used to be.
Right. And I
So
think where some of the mistrust comes into themes from our first town hall is that local school bus contractors over the summer and even in the late spring, maybe even before that, were commenting that they did not think that the proposed schedule was feasible. They're experts in running local bus routes, and they were saying they had a lot of concerns. And I was
we,
advocating for school buses even back in late spring, and I heard them, but I don't think I appreciated how much expertise they had in making those comments. And I did not think it would be so disastrous that the whole time system
well,
would change in that
they
4th week.
increased the walking distance because the cost of the school bus contract estimate came out too high. So they increased the walking distance and it still went up by, I think, 50%.
There was a significant increase in cost.
Yeah, I heard it was like maybe 35 or 40% or more.
It was a
And they're
big
busing
jump.
less students. And so we're basically paying more for less. Um, and I don't know, when you go out and buy stuff, do you buy stuff and say, I'd like to pay more, but don't give me as much? I mean, people don't say that. So why would you not say what's wrong with this equation and what have we done wrong if we get to that point? So it's just bewildering.
Thank you so much for sharing your perspective. Carolyn, I think you have your hand raised. Did you have a comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to tack onto that. I don't know if everybody remembers, but the Board of Ed was supposed to have a public comment section for that, and they canceled it. And then they voted on it anyway. So to me, I mean, I don't think they care what we think because they
Can
wouldn't
you
have
tell me
canceled
what
that.
they canceled, Carolyn?
So they're supposed to be, and I remember when I was on the PTA last year, and I'll have to, once again, this is something I wrote down to try to prove. I remember the president telling us that they had canceled that public comment section. And so we thought, okay, well, they're going to reschedule it, but they didn't. And then they went ahead and voted for the start times change. And I mean, that's a critical part to the equation because that's where we get the chance to voice the concerns that we have. So
I was not as aware of the school start times. I believe there was a public hearing. Can anyone else speak to that? Was anyone a part of the public hearing? I think there was one in the winter for school start time changes, winter 2022. So I'll have to fact check after. I'm happy to touch base, Carolyn. I was not aware that there was another public hearing that was that did not happen. I
awesome.
will
If you
take
can
this
find it, I would
moment.
love that.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to share. Would anyone else like to speak who's on the call right now? So I'm going to switch over to some slides because we're talking about public hearings. And I think an important point to raise is that there was not a public hearing when school buses were cut for some children. Let's see, I'm going to share my screen here. So everyone should be able to see my screen now. And so just to review a little bit of history. Well, first, a little bit about the way policies are made and changed in Howard County for school system policies. So there are a bunch of different policies in the school system. All board policies are assessed in a 6-year cycle by the superintendent's standing policy group. So there is a procedure that the Board of Education has to make, review, and change policies. And if you look at an excerpt highlighted in bold at the bottom of this slide, this is from the Board of Education's handbook. Any board agenda item that's introduced, which involves a matter of policy, first should be shared as a public report. Generally, 30 days following the presentation, a public hearing will be held, and normally action will be taken at the next regularly scheduled meeting. So what this describes is that in typical protocol, when a big policy change is made, there are 3 meetings, right? There's the report, where the school system says, this is what we think needs to be done, and this is why. And then about 30 days later, the public is given a chance to come and say, we disagree, we feel like these other things should be considered. And then finally, the action happens normally at a separate meeting, the meeting that happens after that 30-day public hearing.
Now, I heard from a past school board member that the superintendent will present these plans basically in such a way that often they have a statutory limit, and if they don't like a policy and they have to do something, they have no choice. They have to pass it because they can't do anything. There's no time for them to question anything, and that the system is rigged so that they almost are forced to say yes on everything. That's what I heard from a former school board member.
So we have a couple of board members on the call. I would welcome them maybe after I'm done with these slides if they want to make any comments, but I can talk. I do want to talk about what actually happened with policy 5200, which is the student transportation policy. So in 2021, as part of the normal policy review cycle, this policy was up for review and it was fully reviewed. Recommendations were made. No children were cut from school bus service. Allowable distances for people to walk to bus stops were not significantly increased. These changes were very minor, and although these changes were minor, a full public hearing was held prior to decision making. So on the left of the screen at the bottom, you'll see that there are proposed highlights from the changes that were made in 2021. The policy revisions were that the policy was clarifying that transportation services will be provided to students when the distance between their home and the homeschool is greater than half a mile for pre-K, 1 mile for kindergarten to grade 8, and then grade 9 to grade 12, 1.5 miles. And then it specifically clarified that students may be expected to walk up to half a mile to and from the school bus stop. Prior to that, there was not clear language, and some families felt like half a mile was too far to walk to the bus stop, so they wanted to have that written into the policy. When the policy went up for report, the screenshot on the left lower corner that I just read to you, that was from the report on April 15th, 2021. On May 11th, about 30 days later, there was a public hearing. So anyone who did not like those small changes to the policy could come and speak. I believe there was just one person who basically said, I think this is great. There wasn't a ton of people showing up. There obviously wasn't a big change. Most people wouldn't have that big of an opinion about something like this to show up. But then the vote never happened until June 10th, 2021. So there was almost 2 full months between when a report was made on what the proposed changes to policy 5200 were going to be, and then when the action actually happened where the board voted on policy 5200 changes. So it's very surprising that in 2022, in May, just a year later after this policy had gone up for full review, and everyone in that group felt like this is great, or at least the majority, the vote was done, policy 5200 was good for Howard County. In 2022, major changes were made to policy 5200 without any sort of a public hearing. School bus service was cut for children at all grade levels, and the greatest impact was on elementary school age children. So the greatest number of children affected are actually elementary school age children. The report, so if you look at the white box at the bottom of the screen, that is from board docs, or I'm sorry, from the agenda on the May 26th meeting. And what happened on that day, policy 5200 changes were reported. What HCPSS thought they wanted to do was reported. There was no public hearing, and on that same day, they voted to cut school bus service from 3,500 kids. At the time, they actually thought it was more than 4,000 kids that they were going to be cutting from service. And meanwhile, even though there are caveats that allow the board to make decisions without a public hearing, policy 2020, which talks about how to make and change policy, recommends that sound policy decisions require the consideration of employee recommendations and community input. So there was never a chance after the report on student transportation, there was never a chance for the community to comment that it would be detrimental to families to lose school bus service, and that some families would be harmed more than others, and that equity really needed to be considered, that some kids do not have access to a private vehicle, and this would influence their ability to get to and from school safely. Let's see. And then just to highlight, in that meeting, they never talked about how many children, how many elementary school children would be affected by bus loss, with what was reported as an minimal change, if any, to elementary students. And there are emails from internal office that other people have looked at and have sent to me, showing, as highlighted in red, that people involved in the decision-making process that were involved in sharing information with the Board of Education, they knew that the majority of children, the highest number of children affected were going to be elementary school children, even though those children would not currently be or didn't really stand to benefit directly at the time from later school start times for high schoolers. So I did, while we're on this topic, want to highlight that there are opportunities to advocate for change by speaking at public forum. Many of us have shown up at various times. Because there was never a public hearing on this topic, you can talk about school bus concerns. You can bring up any concerns you have about current bus contracts at any of the upcoming board meetings. And on the right, I have listed the various dates. The Board of Education did finally decide to give us a policy 5200 review 60 days after school started, and they finally scheduled that, and that's going to come up on Thursday, November 16th. So I would encourage you to write that date on your calendar, particularly if you're affected by bus loss or have other concerns. Carolyn, did you raise your hand again?
Yeah, I wanted to point out something that I remember happening last year, and I think impacts the decision, is that I remember the superintendent saying when they started with the bus shortage due to the pandemic, he was working with local companies to try to get pay increases for the bus contractors. But to me now, after talking to the bus contractors, that just was not true. So, I mean, in some ways, since they've refused to increase the pay for the local companies, they created the shortage, which has then caused them to have a trickle-down effect of, because you don't have enough bus drivers, then you have to create longer walking distances. And then it also is impacted by, now you're busing people across the county to schools that just don't make sense. So, I mean, this is not, these decisions, like had a trickle down effect. And it's frustrating that they're acting like it kind of magically happened, when in reality, it seems to me like they created it.
Mindy Roche, I see your hand up.
Yes, I just wanted to comment off of what Carolyn was saying. I work for a local bus contractor, Billings Bus Service, and we had tried to get the county to give us increases to be able to make a bus driver position look more promising, and we were just turned down all the time. And now with the situation of them pulling Zoom in here, the reputation of the transportation is so terrible that bus drivers don't even want to come to our county to even drive. So this whole thing has been very devastating for the bus driver, which is a shame.
That is a shame. Is that happening even at even non-Zoom companies are having trouble recruiting drivers because of that, you think, Mindy?
Yes. Yeah. We're in
Okay.
constant contact with other contractors, and they're having problems as well.
Thanks for sharing. Lisa?
Actually, this is her husband, but Lisa
Oh.
is with me. This is Brent Lovis, and I'm the legislative chair for the PTA Council. I love that you mentioned that we need to advocate for these things. And yes, those meetings were held over a very long period of time and in conjunction with a lot of other hot topics. It was very easy for the average person to miss. But to your point about advocating, not just the Board of Ed, we were advocating as an organization for the county budget all throughout last year. And as you know, we came up roughly $60 million shy of what the superintendent wanted. And this clearly was predicated on a low cost, no cost option, which reduced some of the services. And just as early as last night, I was advocating in front of some council members, which were in our neighborhood, reminding them that we need to fix the budget component at the county level, as well as superintendent, as well as Board of Ed, in order to address these things. And I got the head nods, but this is something we need to start working on today. That budget will be coming out roughly in the May timeframe, and you need to get your grassroots support started early so that these things can be addressed, assuming you even know the cost to address it. So I could go on forever on that topic. My point I'm trying to make is advocate at every level: the Board of Ed, the county council, the state legislation, and just keep working for the children. Thank you.
Thanks, Brent. Appreciate it. Ms. McCoy?
Hold on. Yes, first of all, I apologize for not fully being in the meeting because I was in another meeting, but I was trying to do both.
Thanks for joining us. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you. I'm a very direct person, and I'm a very practical person. And so I just want to put this on the table. With the cost of living increasing, the cost of trying to retain teachers, the cost of everything increasing, the more we ask for, the more we're going to have to be able to pay for it, right? And so I wasn't on the board when they did the no cost, low cost decision, but it was clear that if you compress the time, you're going to need more routes to get the students. But we were told that everything was under control, okay? So then we have the people who are saying, we need our buses back. Well, that means we need even more bus drivers. There are not many people stepping up to become bus drivers. It is not an easy job. And so if we say, well, we want to pay them more, where's the money going to come from? We can hardly pay our teachers to keep them in the classroom. And so there's a limit to how much we can afford. If you ask the county, if you ask the state, where did they get the money from? They get it from us, which means taxes. And people are already saying our taxes are high in this county. And so we have to weigh our wants with our needs, and everything is important. I mean, I would love for our schools to not have issues with mold, but decisions from the past impact the current situations that we're in. And so decisions not to renovate at some other time, which was impacted by some decision prior to that. And so it's not that the board doesn't want to do certain things, it can't do certain things. And so the bus driver issue was an issue before they changed the contracts. That was part of the reason, I believe, why they changed the contracts, because there were not enough bus drivers. I think we had 95, we were short 95 drivers or something like that. And so that was before. This situation with compressing the time and having a brand new contractor from outside come in who has had challenges made it even more frustrating. But it is not for want of trying to provide for the transportation of our students. It's that we did not have the number of people stepping up to provide to be the bus drivers. And so as much as I would want everybody to, I mean, it would just make sense to just have all the students ride the buses to school to cut down on the cars on the road, just for environmental issues. But we don't have enough buses and we don't have enough bus drivers. And so it is what it is, but I want people to really think about what you're asking. It's not with everything you ask for, you're talking dollar signs. And I think even Zoom offered $30 an hour with benefits, and they were still struggling.
Thanks, Ms. McCoy. I appreciate your comments. Sorry, my camera just blanked out on me, so I'm still here. I wanted to ask, I guess, two different questions. One was, I feel like the public, and this has come up a lot, the public wants an understanding of why was Zoom awarded so much more per route than the prior bus contractors have been granted, because a lot of people feel like part of that we're giving a lot of money to this large billion-dollar, startup corporation, and that had we tried to hire more Maryland drivers, that perhaps things would have looked different financially, and then the contract costs would not be as high, and that we could continue to cover the children who were cut from school bus service.
So what the board was told is that when they decided to come up with this different way of awarding contracts for bus transportation, and I can only go by what they told us, they said that the suggestion was made that the bus contractors come together as a consortium and bid on the different routes, right? So that it would make it, I believe it was done to make the whole transportation situation more manageable. Can you imagine having multiple different bus companies, and if your bus company only has one or two buses and one of your drivers doesn't show up and the other bus is doing its job on its route, where's the other bus going to come from? Then you got to go to all your other contractors. Do you have any availability and all of that? And so I believe this is only me talking, not the board talking, not transportation telling me, but as a person on the outside, this is what I think happened. It was we can manage 5 or 6 routes by having 5 or 6 companies responsible for those routes, so that when something goes awry, we can call that company and they have enough backup to be able to supply when there is a bus driver calling out or a bus breakdown or something like that. That's what I believe. But we were told that the local contractors did not want to join in together. That's what we were told.
Thanks, Ms. McCoy. And then a separate question I had. So a lot of families who are cut out of school bus service have been those who can afford it, right? Not everyone can afford it. Some people have lost work time. Some people have made really hard choices in their lives. Some women are choosing to stay at home more, some men as well, but it is disproportionately, from what I hear, affecting mothers' work schedules, right? And so this is not great. And financially, it has huge repercussions for families who live in an expensive county. So in thinking about the inordinate amount of money that families are spending and looking at what other counties are doing around the country, and again, I don't believe there is one solution to this problem. I want everyone to be open-minded about different things. I haven't heard any public conversations about, should we be charging some small fee to families who are not in, like anyone who is a free and reduced meal child, maybe even more generous than that, certain guidelines, charge some small fee to almost fundraise to keep more buses in existence, because we have these flooded car zones where, I mean, are you really gonna, if you are if you are a parent and you want your child to thrive in high school and they're involved in after school sports every day, do you really want them to walk 2 miles to school before school and get up earlier? Or do you want them to get a good night's sleep and drive them? Ideally, you want to drive them, right? So are there ways that we could leverage resources in the community to better fund school bus service, even if there isn't an overall tax increase, even if there isn't, and I know this won't be popular with everyone. Again, I don't think this is but I haven't even heard a public conversation about this. And some families are literally shelling out over a couple $1,000s a month with before and after care because they just can't make the new plan work. And they had very little time. They found out, elementary school families really found out in April if they were paying it, I'm sorry, very end of March, if they were paying attention, right? You didn't find out until then. The non-transportation maps were not released. There's no, the program that the school is using is not one that families have available at home to decide, like, is my home 1.1 mile away? Is my home 1.0 mile? And what property line are they using, right? So that information, families are really surprised by that in March, and financially had negative ramifications from that. So I'm curious to hear if that's been a topic discussed maybe between board members or in other places that I haven't heard.
It's an idea worth considering. I personally have not heard that suggestion, but to me, it's worth looking into, just as with everything else. It would not be popular, I'm sure, because people will say, well, why should we have to pay? Well, where's the money going to come from, right? And it really, environmentally, it just makes more sense to have fewer cars transporting students to school and sitting in lines waiting to drop them off, as opposed to having the buses to do so. But I wrote that down, and that is one of those things that needs to be considered. How that would happen, I have no idea.
It's just an idea I thought would be worth bringing up in a forum like this too.
Right. I mean, even considering who should be running the bus system. Should it be independent contractors, or should it be the bus? Should it be the school system, or should it be the county? Each one of those conversations is going to cause somebody to be upset.
So I see a few other hands raised. So let's see. I'm gonna jump. Let me jump back to Matt Watkins. I'm sorry. Let me jump to Brent. Did you have a comment to Ms. McCoy, or a separate comment? Or
I wasn't expecting that unless there are other
oh,
Brents
I'm so
in the
sorry,
room.
Brent. No. I'm looking. Let me see. So, let's see. Matt Watkins, did you have a comment?
I did. I guess first, thank you to Ms. McCoy for her comments in this conversation and some of her candor, which is not coming out in other venues. I appreciate that. And I guess personally, I would be all on board with raising taxes to solve this problem, but I know not everyone else would be. One thing you said stuck out to me regarding mold problems, that some of these problems are hard to solve today because we have to prioritize with limited resources, and these problems were created due to decisions made in the past. The whole transportation issue now kind of seems like one of these things that even if we come to a point where we're maybe okay with it now, it's going to bite us down the road. And my kids are young, so I'm concerned about down the road. So I guess I wonder if on the board there's any conversation like, hey, the new school times was an interesting experiment, but it didn't work out. Let's save money by going back to the old system, old times from last year. That worked a little bit better. There'll be less congestion. One bus driver can do more routes with the same bus. And then we can prioritize local contractors so that we're not with one California-based company who might jack up the prices in a couple of years. I don't know if you're willing to share if those conversations are going on or not. Thank you.
We haven't had an official conversation about where we go from here because we're actually looking for the after action report to find out just where we are. It would be foolish to just to start deciding before we know the impact. I think that's part of the issue is if we're making hasty decisions, then we make faulty decisions. And so we're waiting to get that. It would sound easy and simple to say, well, let's go back to, a high schooler starting at 7:25 and, and then remember all the support for the students need more sleep. All those things are true, but, they're trade-offs. And so going into the action, looking at the after action report is going to be a very intensive time. And we're going to be looking at all the data that we can possibly get to, before we make another decision about whether or not we're going to go back to square one, or maybe we make some adjustments in other ways. I don't know. And I don't make promises because I don't like promises to be broken. And so all I can say is, as frustrated as you all are, the board is as well. And we want to come up with solutions that would be the least harmful.
Thanks, Ms. McCoy. Henderson, I know you had your hand raised and then you put it down and then you raised it again. So why don't you speak next if you have, if you'd like.
Okay, hi, this is Henderson Brathwaite. I'm a actual local bus contractor. I just want to clarify some things with Ms. McCoy concerning the RFP that was given out to Zoom. I was not able to participate in the RFP because the part of the RFP you needed to have more than 58 routes. I'm a small business. I run about between 10 and 15 routes in the county for 20 years. So I was not able to participate in that RFP. It was more geared towards a big company like Zoom. Yes, we've always had a shortage of drivers in Howard County, but in the 20 years I've been in Howard County, I never had to cancel a route because as local contractors, we always network together. If I'm short, I'll call one of the other contractors. They will help me out and vice versa. We work together as a group, as a network. So that was why we were able to meet those challenges of shortage of drivers. And in the past, we've always asked for more money to help our drivers, and we've never given that in the past. And the fact that recently we were promised a certain amount of money towards helping the drivers, and that wasn't given to us, but unfortunately was given to Zoom. We could have solved this driver problem had we got more resources in terms of extra money for our drivers. We could have retained our present drivers with that, and we could have attracted new drivers. So I think the board may have been didn't get the right information they needed to get in order to make those votes they did, but we could have solved the driver problem had we got the same resources that Zoom had got, and we would have had local drivers who knew the county, who knew the routes, and we could have done a much better job, in my opinion.
Well, I appreciate your comment, and I can say that as far as understanding how the transportation department has operated in the past and understanding whether or not they have sufficient staff to take care of the issues that they encounter has not been a clear answer yet. But I do recall them saying that the local contractors were given the opportunity to, or it was suggested to the local drivers that they come together as a, sort of like with the government contractors, Westinghouse or Northrop Grumman will get small contractors to come in to bid on a large contract. And so it's all under Westinghouse and all under Northrop Grumman, but they're being supported by the smaller contractors. Rather than having hundreds of small contractors, you have one large group that is being managed, that's managing the smaller ones. So are you saying that you all weren't aware that that was an option for you all, or you didn't know about it, or because I can only go by what they tell us.
The option we were given was to go as a subcontractor and work under a larger company, i.e. a Zoom type company. And we're all small businesses. We all work for ourselves independently. So, and we've been doing it for many years. So for us to go for work for another company, that's not going to happen with the small contractors in Howard County.
Right.
So that was the option we were given. And I didn't have the option to bid because I was too small to bid on that RFP. I had to go with a bigger company in order to be part of the process.
Mm-hmm.
So that basically eliminated me from in that whole process of the RFP.
Okay.
I live in Howard County. I'm a resident of Howard County. All my employees are Howard County employees. I pay taxes in Howard County. Now, just think about it. We're paying a company from California who are bringing drivers in from California. So our resources are going to California instead of reinvesting that money within the county. Does that make any sense to us as a county?
Yeah. So number one, yes, that is an outside contractor, but the reality, they realistically, and the expectation was that the drivers would be local, because you can't ship them in. They did it as a short stopgap measure, but that was not the way they were to operate in general. But to talk with me about how they awarded the contract, I wasn't in on it. I understand the frustration about it, and I agree that to have local vendors with the tax base remaining here, and I understand what you're saying, but as you indicated, that because of the requirement that you be able to manage larger numbers of routes, that kind of put you out of the running. But I would think that me personally, if I had a bus company, I would come together with another group and say, hey guys, let's do it together. And we'll individually have our own company, but we're going to come together for this RFP, and we're going to make the bid because we can take those 50 routes.
Okay. We're coming together as an RFP. So say there was 5 companies and they wanted to come together. Those 5, let's say there was 6 companies,
Mm-hmm.
and they wanted to come together. Those 5 companies will have to be under that 6th company. And that's changing your whole company article.
Right.
And You have no control of your company.
So,
So why would I
Mhm.
want to, the business, all of a sudden give my control to another company? I'll have to, and small business with the new RP in terms of invoicing, invoices changing. You have to wait 90 days before you get invoiced. Small business can't wait 90 days to pay the employees.
Mhm.
So that whole RFP was not advantageous to the small business in Howard County. That was
I appreciate
advantageous
that.
to a large company.
Mhm.
And it wasn't an incentive for a large company to come in and
Mhm.
take out the small companies, in my opinion.
I appreciate your perspective. And again, I don't even know what the RFP process was. I'm relatively new on the board. I don't even know if we saw the RFP. I know we asked to see it after the fact, but I don't know if the board before me saw the RFP and what the requirements were. I understand the reasoning, what the possible reasoning was, because they really didn't give me any reasoning. But the possible reasoning may have been, but as it's all about matter of perspective. And so, I appreciate the smaller contractors, but I also appreciate the frustration of having to manage multiple numbers of individual contractors when you're trying to address transportation needs. And
But
so, yeah.
But the advantage of having multiple contractors is that you don't rely on one company.
Yeah, I agree.
So,
You're
like I said,
talking about monopoly versus.
if I have issues, I have 3 or 4 companies I can call and say, hey, I'm short one driver, can you help me out? And vice versa. We are all invested in the county for many years, and we all network in the county. All our drivers are local. So if you invest in one company, if that company goes bust, guess what? The whole county goes bust.
That's true.
So
Thank you
you got to
so
be careful
much.
about that.
Thank you. And I just wanted to stop to say thank you, Henderson, for your service to our community as a bus contractor. I imagine you've also driven children when needed. And I just want to stop and thank. I know I recognize a few names on this call, and it looks like we have several school bus drivers and bus drivers. So I just want to stop and say thank you. We appreciate that you're continuing to take kids to and from school right now. I know it's been a really hard year, so thank you for continuing to transport kids, even as things have been really, really hard for you guys. I see a couple folks who haven't spoken at all, so I'm going to go to Corinna Fisher and then Paula Sanchez after her. Corinna?
Hi there. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. And I was actually at the CAC meeting this earlier this evening, so I don't want to repeat anything that's already been discussed for the sake of not sparing people from redundancy, but has the topic of tier 1 middle schools come up
It's
yet?
all you, Corinna. That has not come up yet.
Okay. So I want to say that so for tier 1 middle schools, and I don't know if anybody here fits in that category, but I think it was September 19th, if I'm not mistaken, but we got notice that, our times were going to adjust. So we had the start time adjust where the schools, instead of opening at 8, we're going to open at 7:50. So we all were expecting, okay, 10 minutes beforehand, that's doable. But what we weren't anticipating was, in my mind, an intentional disguise of abandoning our children at their school buildings outside in order to reflect a more successful arrival time. And so what ended up happening was, instead of 10 minutes earlier for the start time, and then my child, I'll use an example, being picked up at 7:32, getting to the school and then getting in the building, we then were given, now I live 3 minutes from my school, can't walk there, busy, we're trapped, no sidewalks, busy roads, all that kind of stuff. But I then was given that my child was going to be picked up 20 5 minutes earlier than his prior bus pickup time. And seeing, I'm just going to say it, but seeing the shenanigans about the communication coming out to the parents and this or that, within an hour of realizing what was happening, I kind of put it out there as a social media post, and I just had the opinion that why in the world would the school system knowingly pick my child up at 7:18 in the morning and then drop him off at a building that did not open for another 25 minutes, and not even the front doors were open. And I said, is this the school system's deliberate attempt to report false numbers? And then 6-7 hours, well, not even that, because the school isn't in system that whole, or in service that whole time. But then the email came from Dr. Martirano reporting success about the tier 1 schools. And somehow magically it increased by 10%. And that was because they were measuring the buses, not the kids. And so I really want to say to the Board of Education, and I know Ms. McCoy is here with us tonight, that I appreciate that the board heard the tier 1 parents, because apparently that's going to be adjusted. Yesterday, as of yesterday, it was not. So I followed the buses to the school, and I physically sat in the parking lot. So I missed work. I took off work to do this, followed the school bus and sat out there. There was not an adult amongst those children. I counted just very quickly at least 125 children that were standing out there. Our school is at 110% capacity. So the kids cannot fit in the vestibule, nor can they fit in the overhang. So many of them, if it was raining, snowing, whatever the case may be, and the parents don't realize that our kids are being abandoned with no adult supervision, they're going to stand out in the inclement weather. I don't know if everybody is aware of this. Well, it was on social media, but we had a student bring a gun to school. And so I cannot imagine that the school system knowingly made the decision to transport these children, to just dump them on school property without supervision. And to me, I can't translate it any other way. And I've lost a lot of trust in the school system between the capital budget process, this bus transportation decisions. There's just a series of things that I feel like the communication that's sent out is more CYA than anything, because I cannot believe that that is what's happening to our kids. And so I think my follow-up question for Ms. McCoy, and I appreciate you being here tonight, is what progress have you heard about the tier 1 kids not being abandoned in front of their schools? Because that discussion was on September 20th. And I think it was actually you, Ms. McCoy, and I appreciated this comment, because there was conversation suggested that we should actually dip into our budget, which we are broke, apparently, both on operating and capital, that we dip into our budget to pay teachers or staff overtime to come out and watch the children, instead of just having the buses arrive on time. And I think it was Miss McCoy, and correct me if I was wrong, that said, basically in exasperation, this is lunacy. Why are we even talking about paying people to stand out there when we have kids sitting on these buses until the doors open? The bus drivers should not be tasked with that. That is not their responsibility, nor are they equipped to do that. So I'm just hoping that the patience that tier 1 middle school parents are trying to hang on to is not in vain. And God forbid that a fight break out. There was one in our school that caused a partial lockdown, and that was inside the school between 2 female students. and a substitute teacher was struck in the face. And that caused a partial lockdown. I cannot imagine if those two same students got into a physical altercation in the middle of over 125 students with no adults. I cannot even imagine what would ensue. I can't even believe this is happening. And the fact that that email came out touting this successful statistic was such a slap in the face to those of us that have kids that this was done to. So I am hoping that Ms. McCoy, if you have any information on tier 1 middle schools, that would be great. My other thing is that this was troubling, but I posted this on social media 2 days ago. And some of the insensitive responses from community members that call themselves advocates and things like this are saying, well, what's the big deal? They're outside, things like this. And I do not believe in reactive fixes. I don't want a child hurt. I don't want a child attacked or fight or inclement weather to do something. And the winter is coming for that. And what is also happening is when those insensitive, dismissive comments were made, which it floors me that anybody can even say that. I asked my son this morning, with the vestibule, are you allowed to go in the vestibule? Are you allowed to stand on the side? And his response was that not only are they not allowed in their schools, but when the teachers who were arriving while this herd of children were outside the building, they were yelling at the kids, basically accusing them of intentionally standing in front of the doors to block the teachers from coming in. So now they're not even allowed to wait in the vestibule. So there is no child in the vestibule or the front doors. They're all outside. And they're being accused of intentionally blocking teacher and being yelled at by frustrated teachers that are trying to get through a mob of children. So this is what my child is experiencing. And his last comment was describing that. And he said, I hate my school because it's overcrowded. It is deteriorating. There's 54 bathrooms to one child. He has to deal with that alone, and now compound that he's being abandoned in front of the school and then being yelled at by teachers who are desperate to get inside and frustrated that they have to navigate through a herd of over 100 children. So that's where I'll try and end. I'm at my wit's end about this. I don't know what else to do, but somebody's going to get hurt.
Thanks, Corinne. I appreciate your comments. I also wanted to give a shout out. Student board member Miss Ayaz is also here. I know everyone has talked to Miss McCoy, but Miss Ayaz has been here from the very beginning, even when we were testing sound. So just be aware that your comments are being heard.
Thank you.
All right. Miss Paula Sanchez.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you. First of all, thank you so much for taking the time to do this and everybody here and all our complaints. I'm here to talk about a special ed transportation. This is the third year that my child goes to special ed transportation, and of course, this is the first year that we've had so many issues. In our street, there are more than a few children with special ed. They didn't use the ed transportation, and we always have the same bus, but now they are split between Zoom vans, which it's created a whole chaos because we're in the same street and we're little neighbors, and we have around 3 to 4 vans. The first time that we saw the vans, we didn't know they were Zoom. We didn't know what it was. It was no aide with the driver, and unfortunately, on the van, there is still no aide. Sometimes some weeks they send than anyone, just the driver. I don't think the drivers know that they are supposed to get out of the vans and open doors for them and help them buckled up. Usually the driver gets that. And that's an issue, big issue. They don't, then they don't have any signs saying children on board or anything like that. So another concern that we have is that how any community members are not they're not familiar with Zoom or with this new contract, or they are not parents at all, how they're going to respect these vehicles on the road. We've seen them sometimes on 108, no amber lights, looking for maps and making sure, you know, because they don't know where they're going. So that's another issue right there. We decided not to send our daughter anymore using the vans until they move to buses. I've been told that that's the idea. I don't know when that's going to happen, but that brings another topic of consistency. My daughter has ADHD, and consistency, it's a must for them. She feels that why she's not riding the bus, why every single time she has a new driver, there is no aide. So to her, she's like, I don't know if they're going to take me to school or not, because I don't know if that's, I don't know the driver. I have no idea what they're doing. So sometimes they show up late or arrival times, which again, consistency to them, it's so important. It pretty much sets the mood for the entire day. And if they arrive late to school, that's not good. That's pretty much what I have. I really hope that they do take priority. I know it's everybody's in the same boat. Everybody is very frustrated with this. But again, I just don't know who is picking up my daughter. Well, now I'm getting the text, which sometimes the drivers, they don't match the information. That happened to us last week. They decided to change drivers at the last minute and the app didn't update it. So that's the reason why we decided not to use the vans and send her. We're going to start sending her whenever they send we transfer to buses, because we feel more secure. We feel that she will be safer if we wait for that. So I really hope they prioritize special ed, because it's really nerve-wracking. These are kids. They are not, they can't articulate themselves. They can't defend themselves. Most of the time they just go, they just follow, and they, I don't feel safe sending my daughter with the drivers at all.
Well, I appreciate
Can I
you
ask a
sharing.
clarifying question real quick, Ms. McCoy, before you jump in? Is are the aides still not on the special needs buses? Because my understanding was that problem was supposed to be addressed and that it was a legal requirement for many children's IEPs.
That is correct. So at the
Okay.
first
That's not
weeks,
good.
they were not sending and they sent aides with in the vans. But it's been a week, and last week and this week they have not, at least there is no aid.
Okay. Thank you so much. And thank you for sharing your story. I'm so sorry that's still happening. Ms. McCoy.
Yes, I am baffled by that as well, because we were told that the van drivers, that there was to be an aide on along with the drivers. And so I would really appreciate it if you would write the board. It's one of the things about having the town hall is that we can't necessarily track the correspondence, because if it's not written down, there's no evidence. So if you could just, you don't have to give a long email, just indicate concern for van transportation, so that we would be able to flag it faster. But it is important that that you all write us, because we can only go by the information that is given to us. And we were made to believe that the van situation was not a place of concern as far as meeting the needs, because the vans were really designed specifically for the special ed. Whether you have a smaller population of students, you can, take care of their needs better than and more efficiently than having a large bus pick up 2 or 3 children. And so that was the idea behind having the van option. So if that's not working well, we really need to know that.
And Ms.
Yeah,
McCoy, just to
if
speak
I'm-
to that, there have been some other families commenting on social media that there are still problems with special needs buses. I have encouraged folks to reach out directly to the Board of Education with their concerns, and I'll continue to do so. But from your perspective, and Ms. Ayaz, if you all can also advocate to make sure that those children are getting what they need, I think that
Yes.
would be really helpful for the community. And I feel like a lot of the
Absolutely.
families have commented that they didn't feel like their needs were prioritized in that first week of school. So now as we're in the 6th week of school, if they're still having problems, I would hope that their needs would be prioritized by now.
Just
So-
adding on to Miss
Mhm.
McCoy, we do read every single email that we get. We definitely
Thank you.
do. So getting that information in writing can be really, really helpful so we can escalate it and bring it to the right people. And I just wanted to add on to what Miss Fisher said and kind of address some of that, because I'm not sure if anyone addressed her comments. The congestion at the school is something that I've heard a lot about, with students having to wait outside of school. And I know that's a really big concern, especially as the weather changes. And so I definitely asked questions about why that was happening. And from my perspective, what I can tell is that it's not a deliberate attempt to inflate the statistics or the reporting from the central office side, but rather to avoid having buses getting caught in car rider drop-off congestion, because that was a big factor in students being late from, for buses being late from one tier to the next. As for students having to wait outside, one thing that I did ask about was having students able to be sent to the cafeteria or the auditorium rather than waiting outside. And I was told that there are like before and after care programs and such that are running during those times, which have made it difficult to send large numbers of students to those locations, but it is something that they are considering. And the goal is to have the bus drop-off times be coordinated and adjusted to bring it closer to school start time, so students are waiting for lesser amounts of time. So I don't think that this is going to continue to be the case for the rest of the school year. I do believe that there are adjustments in place. So I hope that might give some insight as to why that congestion is, or that, drop off and start time inconsistency exists.
Thanks, Ms. Ayaz. At this point, is there anyone here who wants to speak who has not spoken yet? Stephanie, did you want to jump in or not tonight? All right, if nobody's speaking, I will let Mr. Tippett, I think you were, is that it?
Yeah, it's
You
Brad.
had your hands up. You've spoken
did,
earlier,
yes.
but we have a couple minutes. If you guys want to just keep comments brief, we're approaching
so
9:30.
2 comments, Mrs. McCoy. I'll tell you that when they got rid of the small companies and had them work for big companies for the federal government, that's actually a disaster for small businesses and has created a terrible work environment. So I wouldn't say that's a good idea for the buses, because if I was a bus driver, I'd be seeking another county. But you said you're waiting for the after action report from the county. And at this point, I would be questioning whether I would believe that report when they gave it to you. And are you concerned that what you're being given is honest and sincere? Because I kind of feel the county's been manipulating things. The central school system has been manipulating things. And so I wouldn't believe anything I got from them.
That's why it's important that we hear from the public, because we are really relying on what information they give us, to, just as with the transportation situation, all the way up until the day of before school started, we were assured that everything was under control.
So I would say you've brought up that there's no money and we're out of money, and I totally believe that, and I've brought that up before, but I would think at this point you should be asking the county to consider going back to the extended bus times, because that's how you reduce the number of buses you needed. And don't forget also before you, they redistricted in a method that also greatly increased the need for buses. So we've had a continual thing of not having extra buses and requiring more and more and more and more buses. And so the solution, so one of the comments that I saw online was that other school systems considered changing the hours, and they didn't because they couldn't get the buses. And so it's like, yes, we'd like to do this change, but we can't make it work. And so if it's not working, at some point you have to say, I don't know what the solution is, but until you can figure this out, we need to go back to something that we used to do, because we can't afford, like, the extra money you're spending for buses. Can you imagine what we could do with that for our kids? The kids aren't learning by being on the bus. They're not learning by being dropped off, by being, I mean, it's terrible. I mean, you had another parent here who I felt I could hear her on the verge of crying over concerns for her schools, for her child's safety and what she's doing. And, I feel really sorry for the parents who are sending to their kids to schools where they feel like their children are in danger by going to schools. Because that's just horrific, that schools are not safe to go to. And we're not even talking about bringing guns to school. We're saying that we have an internal problem. And if you don't feel safe with your kid going to school, then why are we sending kids to school?
Well,
Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate your perspective. And again, hasty decisions lead to bad decisions. And so the after action report and the constant communication from the public via email or through testifying, as Dr. Happel does regularly, helps us to stay aware of what is actually going on. I personally am not on social media. I don't intend to be on social media. That is not a place that I think is helpful. But getting the information via the email and through public testimony, and even calling us, is helpful. But having a documented tracking method through email is the most helpful. We are deeply concerned about how things have turned out, and there are going to be changes. It's just that at this point we can't say what they're going to be. Remember, the school system paid a consultant to come up with this wonderful idea, right? They pay consultants for redistricting. They pay consultants for the bus transportation situation. And so just because they're experts doesn't mean that their decisions are necessarily the best, but that's what happened. And, I came along after the fact, but we're relying on so-called experts. And I'm not a fan of experts, because I believe that people only know what they can know within the realm of their experience. And that there's no one that knows everything, and no one can give you a perfect solution to anything.
So again, we're almost at 9:30 here, so we want to give everybody one quick minute to say what you'd like to say, and then I'll give a concluding comment, and we'll close out for the night. So Carolyn?
I had a few comments, but I'll just cut it down to one. To piggyback on what he just said, I wanted to ask, you keep referring to a after action report, so I'd like to know when that's due to us. And then, don't you have concerns that the same individuals who are providing the information, which clearly was just very wrong, is then also responsible for giving you the after action report? Where are the checks and balances in that? I mean, to me, it looks very much like there's a corrupt individual here that had different interests at heart and has been giving you false information. Because I know personally, from having worked with contractors, I worked for Whiting Turner, that's not correct how subcontractors work. They don't work under one head. They come together and they bid together, but they're all their individual companies. So I think that it's very concerning that there doesn't seem to be any checks and balances here, and all the information is getting submitted back to these individuals who are then going to give you back the report. How do I know they're not picking and choosing what they want to see? Because that's how it feels to the public right now. Thank you.
Thanks, Caroline. Let's see. Corinna?
Thanks. I'll just make a quick comment. And Ms. Ayaz, I appreciate you acknowledging my comment because it wasn't responded to. My only thing is, I will say this. If the email wasn't kind of anticipated, what I would say is if the school system is going to send out an email saying that transportation was a success, then they should wait on that maybe a little bit to make sure they understand what the consequences were. So I understand your comment, but at the same time, as a parent whose child was dumped off and waiting more than 20 minutes outside, that is not success. It's abandonment. And if anything happens to my child, that's what I'm going to go with, or anybody else, just to be clear. So that might not have been the intent, but there was knowledge that to get those results, those children would be abandoned outside the school buildings. That was intentional, and that was known. You can't expect a bus to arrive at a school 20, 30 minutes before those front doors are open and not know that you're abandoning children. And then to send an email that says that this was successful and our buses are 10% more successful than they were, but not giving a darn about the kids. That's a problem. So maybe not that was the intent to do, but it was the result on the backs of the children, and that is still happening. So I'm going to say that. The last thing I'll say is that's great that there's an intent to get my child out of the weather and into the buildings. But I want to know when that's going to happen, because the discussion was brought to the board and clearly heard by our transportation department, our superintendent, and the Board of Education on September 20th. It is now October 4th. So that's great that there's an intent to close the gap, but we need to know when that's going to happen. So I appreciate your comments, but I'm having a visceral reaction, as you can see, because I'm worried about the safety of hundreds of children in the 5 middle schools that were caught up in this tier 1 mess. And lastly, I'll close with, I fully support later start times for these kids and the school system's attempt to completely change transportation and switch to a California-based company, while at the same time trying to implement new start times, was a lot to bite off at once. It is not later start times that are the problem. Our transportation is the problem. And last year and the year before, we were on crutches because of double runs. And it masked a lot of these issues that have been here well before start times came into place. It's a transportation issue. It is not a later start time issue. And the kids need both safe, efficient transportation and later start times that are backed in science, and we are way behind decades of advocacy for that to happen. So I will close with that. And lastly, I want to thank you, Dr. Happel, because you have provided a platform for this community to rally with laser focus, which there's so many topics that we need to do that. Capital budget is another, but you have provided that. And I wish there were more fair and unbiased advocates that would get into the community and provide this. And I cannot thank you enough. So I bow down to
Very
you.
kind.
Thank you for having a place where we can have a voice for our kids.
Thank you. I see Alicia Laraway. I haven't seen your hand raised before. If you'd like to speak, go ahead.
Hi. I have 2 children, and one of them is driving to school, and the other one is actually in a specialty private school for learning disabilities. So the reason I got on is I'm actually an early intervention nurse who works with birth through 3 in another county. So what I wanted to just bring up, and granted, this is something I saw online, but I thought it was worthy of advocating. I know, Ms. McCoy, you said social media is not your thing, which I 100% understand. However, I saw this and I just thought it was worthy of bringing the attention to. It was about the children with special needs that are being put into vans who are younger. Part of my job when I was transitioning children from early intervention to PEP programs, you know, at the age after 3, was making sure that was a safe way to transport a child, whether they were in a wheelchair or if they had poor motor control and needed booster seats. I was reading a comment regarding children being put into vans without booster seats. I know our school buses don't necessarily have seat belts and there are different rules, but as far as a van, which is a regular car, transporting a child, I don't believe those rules apply. And I think it is a disservice to some of our most vulnerable children. And I wanted to make sure that that was heard, because I think if we had a car accident, and especially if there are not, you know, paras or aides in the cars to see those things, I just thought, what a terrible injustice that would be to those children and their families, as well as our county. So I just wasn't sure if, like I said, I didn't see it myself, but just the fact that it was brought up by a parent who maybe doesn't know how to advocate for themselves. That's something that I do for a living. So I wanted to make sure I brought it here, hoping that it would find kind of a sounding board.
Thank you so much for bringing that up and for raising your voice so that others could be heard as well. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you.
And then Brent, I think you're the last one with a hand raised, and then we'll close out.
I always like being the last. A lot of people think their hands are tied with the funding for this initiative and effort. It isn't. A lot of the controls are within the county council as well as the state delegation. But please advocate on your behalf with those. We have school surcharge fees, road taxes, all sorts of inflation-based items that have not been adjusted, and you could easily recoup up to $30 million a year for the school system just by closing the gaps in there. And lastly, please consider looking at some big picture storm clouds that are on the horizon. There is a requirement from the state to do electrification. Those buses cost about $400,000 each. They're going to be very dependent on federal grants and state grants to try to do that. And as a contracted service, it gets even more complicated. And those are some things that are going on in the background, which I haven't heard many people discussing, but very relevant to this contract as well as future contracts. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Brent. So I just wanted to take a moment to thank everyone for coming together tonight. I think it was important for us to get together. Now it's been a little over 2 weeks since that initial town hall. I want to highlight a few issues that came up tonight. Special education, children who have guaranteed services, we really need to prioritize getting those. Anyone who sees a comment, please reach out to those families and also ask them to speak directly with the board so that they're aware of what's going on there. Sports, it sounds like, continues to be a concern. Continuing to the conversation with others in the community, it's still hard to get a sense of how many of the schools are affected with that, but that does seem to continue to be a concern. And then brainstorming ideas for solutions. I think a few ideas were tossed around, and certainly more things for the board to consider. So with that, I'm happy to linger if anybody wants to talk directly, but other than that, I want to thank, I know Ms. Ayaz and Ms. McCoy, I really thank you for your time tonight, coming in and volunteering to talk with us. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I appreciate your effort as well. And again, hearing from those who are actually experiencing what's going on is extremely important, because we are relying on reports coming to us, and we don't know about the veracity of the reports. you know, the information is only as good as the source. It's sort of like when they developed the transportation routes through a computer system. Well, the input, what kind of input went in, and then do you check the output? And so as much information as we can get is really important for us, because we're sort of flying blind. And so we really rely on the public. And I tell students, parents, teachers all the time, please write the board. That is one of the best ways for accountability to be established.
Thanks, Ms. McCoy. Well, with that, I want to thank everyone for coming tonight. I'm happy to receive emails through Neighbors for Buses as well. And I know sometimes people want to anonymously pass something on. If there's any reason you feel like you cannot directly contact the board, we're also happy to be a neutral, just someone else to pass on a concern. neighborsforbuses@gmail.com is the best way to reach us. So thank you so much. I hope everyone has a good night.
Thank you so much for this forum. It was really insightful.
Oh, thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate your taking the time. And I know it's a school night for you as well. So really appreciate your coming and being on time and staying the entire time. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. Have a good night.